all those civil rights enthusiasts who are trying to relive the famous "I Have a Dream" speech in the nation capital. Right now, we seem to have an assault on some of the fundamental gains we made over the last quarter of a century. After the George Floyd murder, we had some significant improvement in race relations in America. Now we've seen eradication of some of those gains by the abolishment of the affirmative action by the Supreme Court. We've seen some other rollback of these type of issues. And so there's a lot to be accomplished in days going forward to restoration of civil rights. We've seen an assault on the rights of minorities, and women, and things, so we have to move forward. Now, today we have our superstar panel, Attorney Milton out of LA and Attorney Vanita Banks, Chicago. And we're going to have some important issues to cover today, but I thought that I'll start off with that. But the second thing, though, this week we had a presidential debate, and you listen to the debate, and it's like the people on the stage were living in an alternative reality. The Ramaswamy guy, I can't pronounce his name, he got a lot of letters in his name, Milton and Vanita. Maybe you can help out, but essentially, he said climate problem is a hoax. I'm thinking, where did they get this idiot from? We got record heat across the country. We got fires in our Hawaii. We got the water temperature hitting almost 100 degrees in certain parts. And he don't think the climate is an issue. And we have what amounted to a tropical storm or hurricane that was going to hit the coast of California. I've never seen that before during my lifetime. I don't remember that before. Am I right about that, Milton?
Well, Nathaniel, it's pretty warm out here these days, but the weather really doesn't bother me that much personally. And I've read that, what did I just recently read a headline about the fire will kill you before you suffer or something like that. But anyway, yes, there's some increased heats out here.
Yeah. Now, the second thing, the third thing I want to cover, particularly Vanita, is that you mentioned to me about the debate, but let me just go over some facts real quickly. The Republicans all say that Trump did a phenomenal job, but let's just talk about, they're talking about the budget. The budget statistic, if you start from 1929 at zero, up to the time Trump took office, is about $21 trillion. In 42 months, it went up to 28 trillion. So by the time he left office, it was 29 trillion. So he created $8 trillion federal deficit during his presidency, 8 trillion. So Donald Trump is 27 to 28% of the federal deficit of the United States. He did it in 4 years. And they said that he did a good job managing the government. He bankrupted the American economy. The economy lost 2.9 million jobs during his presidency. Corporate tax profit went up to a record because they had lower taxes. The international trade deficit went way up to 40.5% under his leadership. In other words, then he filled the Supreme Court 1/3 of judges who have abolished women's right, reproductive rights. So that was his mantra. And by the way, 3 million people lost health insurance under the Trump presidency, job loss with a high unemployment rate when he left office. The pandemic was out of control because he didn't know how to manage it. We had ill will among our allies all around the world. And by the same token, he made friends with dictators like Russia and North Korea. And this is what they call a great presidency. That's idiotic in my mind. I'm thinking, are you kidding me? I mean, look at what actually happened. It's almost like people living in an alternative reality. Now, having said that, back to the issue today. Yes, sir.
He did what he was put in office to do, create chaos and cause change. So I guess they look at that as a successful presidency because he did what they wanted him to do. They meaning the right wing of our political system. So we may look at it as he messed up, he didn't do good for the people, but I've been in conversations with people who are in touch with that side of our society, and he did what they wanted him to do. He created this chaos. He stopped the liberal movement.
I'm just looking at a ad that's running in Chicago right now. It's a ad supporting the former president, which states that during his presidency, the country was safer. We were all safer, that we were all wealthier and, most prosperous during his term. And so to your point, Attorney Lee, it's almost like, some are living in this alternate, reality, a different universe. When you talk about climate change, right today, of course, we know that there's a record heat wave across this whole nation and that millions of Americans are suffering currently under this heat wave. Record tornadoes, hurricanes, rainstorms across the nation as well. And there's no, quote, climate change. Also, what was stark for me was that of the 8 candidates that participated in the debate, only 2 stated that they would not vote for Trump if he was the candidate. So in terms of who won that debate, I think they were all equally poor. I thought that Nikki Haley showed some knowledge in foreign affairs, and she held her own as the only woman candidate on the stage. I think his name may be pronounced Vivek Ramaswamy. Very
Hold a second. We have some interference
candidate as well.
Broadcast. Hey, producer, could you check with the station, find out why we have a bleed today? Wait a second. Hey, we have a bleed on our station. The radio have go to broadcast on our show now. You don't? Really? Can you hear it?
I heard something in the background, but it's not coming from us.
Oh, it's not coming from us?
No.
Okay. Okay then.
Guns and America. It's a touchy chemistry. It's something that most people are not comfortable talking about, but they must talk about this. Because this is an issue that affects all Americans. 58% Americans or someone they're close to have experienced gun terror in their lifetime. 100 Americans are killed by gun violence every day. 100 every day. 230. Thank you for calling.
Okay, so now, having said that, the amount of gun violence under Trump presidency is double in mass shootings in America, Attorney Banks. And so all these allegations they're making on TV ads is almost like we're living in an alternative reality. They completely missed the point. Somehow they're glorifying this presidency as one of the greatest ever, but it was a complete disaster. We were having thousands of people die every day, and the president had a very slow response to the COVID virus. We have the idiot governor from Florida who claimed credit for giving Floridian freedom, but I saw a massive amount of people dying, and they hit these statistics. If they kept accurate statistics, Florida probably had the second highest number of people that died beyond New York, where the pandemic became the hotspot in the world for a while there in New York City. And yet they're claiming credit for something that never occurred. It's sort of like we deal with an alternative reality with the presidential election. In the presidential election, one candidate lost by 7.1 million votes, and they claimed victory. Somehow they thought that they won the election. So we see this occurring time and time again. And so the point I'm making is that we're going to see a lot of ads, like here in Indianapolis. We have a guy running for mayor, a Republican running for mayor. They just make up statistics and say, I'm going to make our community safe, with no prior experience of doing anything to make the community safe. And so we see this from time to time. But in any event, we have some callers on the line. Let's go to the call and we'll come back. Okay, caller, you have a question or comment for legal issue today? Hello?
Hello.
Hello? Ms. Cooley,
Hello?
you have a question for us. Go ahead.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead, sir. What's your question?
This is Rob Cooley. I had an opportunity to talk. This is Rob Cooley. I had an opportunity to talk to you about a week ago.
Yes, sir.
And I had a question, and I'm going to try to figure out how to frame this, and so you could answer. The young lady, the lady that brought Trump up on the charges, I think the governor is saying that he was trying to do something as far as getting her out, and she's been under threats and everything. They're talking about passing legislation to get her out of her job. How is it that, number one, if that takes place, how is it that we accept that? And what makes them think that they could just do this blatantly and we not respond to it? And I'll take your response off the air. Thank you.
Well, I think maybe Attorney Banks, that's a good question by Mr. Poole. What do you think?
Well, I think he asked the question of you. However,
Oh, to me,
that action is totally unacceptable. We're seeing the same thing. Well, let me just go back and say, with respect to District Attorney Fannie Willis, I mean, she was duly elected by the people of Georgia. And so we also noted this week that there is a GOP investigation of her, but again, based on what? She's duly elected. She's carrying out her duties and responsibilities as the elected district attorney. After a 2-year investigation, she returned the indictment, the 91-page indictment, which lays out methodically the conspiracy to overturn an election. There's been no evidence that there's any fraud associated with this election. She has methodically returned an indictment against 19 individuals. And as we discussed last week, Attorney Lee, you were amazed by the evidence demonstrated by, recorded videos and tapes, etc. So any action against Fannie Willis, which we're seeing against African-American female prosecutors across this country, is intolerable and unacceptable and should be opposed on all fronts. We're seeing the same thing happen with the duly elected DA, Miss Monique Worrell in Florida, who has been suspended by Governor DeSantis for allegedly not performing her job. And then when we look at the facts, we see that crime has actually declined in her jurisdiction during the time that she's been in office. So these are blatant attacks. One federal judge in Florida has ruled that the suspension or firing of a district attorney under these circumstances is illegal. But he also stated that he had no authority to reinstate the district attorney. So Monique Worrell in Florida plans to pursue all of her legal actions because there's an administrative process. She was suspended, and that doesn't mean she's fired. And so there's an administrative process that needs to take place. So she's pursuing her legal channels, as well as she has already announced that she's going to run again for that office. And we should all protest these actions, as well as support her in her reelection campaign.
And the answer is quite more specifically. We got a really nice text from one of our callers, Pierre Pullen. He pointed out that Fannie, the DA Willis down in Georgia, she argued that Meadows, who is trying to get his case transferred to federal court. Now, this is very important in terms of this notion of trying to remove her as a prosecutor. The idea is that that law dealt with the fact that you're trying to get prosecutors who weren't prosecuting people. So it'd be a hard road to travel for them to say you're going to remove a prosecutor for prosecuting your friends. It doesn't work that way. But what's interesting, Meadows, who was chief of staff for the Trump administration at the time, he was down in Georgia and he was charged in the indictment was some specific thing that he did in Georgia. And he, of course, wanted to remove his case to federal court, claiming that the Constitution requires that these federal employees acting within the scope of their employment be tried in federal court. The problem, though, is that Fannie Willis fired back and said, hey, you're acting in violation of the Hatch Act. And so therefore, you can possibly say that this is part of a federal process because what you did was illegal. You violated the federal law. So therefore, you cannot possibly claim to be subject to protection of some type of immunity because what you did was also a crime under federal law. And that was very interesting because in the DC indictment, former President Trump, there was some duplicated type thing when I was looking at the indictment in DC. They have the unindicted co-conspirators, but some of the same material allegations in the federal action filed in DC also are in the state court, although it's worded differently. But the idea is that you try to overthrow the election in Georgia. They had like 5 or 6 states in the indictment, like Nevada, Michigan, Pennsylvania. So it was not just Georgia that there was an assault on democracy. It was in multiple states in which the election results were relatively close. Well, so that's going to be interesting because, Milton, I was thinking that if you were going to try to prove something in federal court and you're trying to prove a violation of right, you have to take the stand. You become the plaintiff. So how does he prove his rights are violated without him actually taking the stand? Now, I was just thinking about that.
Well, it's what he did. They can charge him with what they believe he did, and he doesn't have to take the stand in his defense. The prosecution still has the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the specific things they say is a crime. He did it, like in any other court. So just because it's in federal court doesn't mean he has to take the stand.
Well, but here's the problem, though. He's seeking removal. I'm talking about on the sole legal issue of removal from the state action to federal court. So in the removal action, you have to come forth with evidence to support removal. So in order to say I'm entitled to be in federal court, because everything I was doing was acting in the scope of my federal authority. And Fannie Willis saying, what you did was a crime under federal law because you violated the Hatch Act, which says that you can't be involved in political process.
I don't think you can force a criminal defendant to take the stand, Nathaniel, in any situation. I think that attorneys would have his defense attorneys would have the burden of producing sufficient evidence to show that he would have immunity. You follow me?
Yeah.
Okay.
And state law would be applied in the federal case as well. And so we're hearing the two arguments on both sides. One, Mark Meadows is saying the case should be removed under section 1442, and that they were acting under, quote, oath of office. And she's saying that, and you're saying, Attorney Lee, that the fact that she's arguing there's a violation of the Hatch Act should prevent removal?
Well, because the Hatch Act say that you can't engage in political participation in a government capacity. So what she's saying is that you can't seek protection of federal courts because you violated the federal law by doing political activities while you're claiming at the same time you act within the scope of your employment. She's saying that cannot be in the scope of your employment because you're violating the federal criminal code.
Well, we've seen in other, in some of these other indictments against Trump, that his request to remove the case was denied. And so we'll see how the judge rules in this case. Also, interestingly, we saw this week that Mark Meadows has requested a speedy trial, and that the trial is scheduled to commence on October 3rd of this year. We'll see if that happens.
Well, that's a fascinating, Attorney Banks and Grimes. And I tell you why. In response to that, I saw that she said, okay, let's try it in October. I mean, so this is going to be fascinating legal maneuver because you can look at it on both sides, Milton. That is that the other defendant get to see a real trial in action, and they see the allegation that's been logged against them, and they get a chance to analyze it to make some correction in their defense strategy. On the other hand, though, what is a likely outcome, if they go to trial, they get convicted, they run the risk of a much more stiffer sentence.
Can I read this, Nate? Can I read the Hatch Act overview? The Hatch Act, a federal law passed in 1939, limits certain political activities of federal employees as well as some state, DC, and local government employees who work in connection with federally funded programs. The law's purposes are to ensure that federal programs are administered in a nonpartisan fashion, to protect federal employees from political coercion in the workplace, and to ensure that federal employees are advanced based on merit and not based on political affiliation. If that helps any in this discussion. That's the Hatch Act. So I would think that the defendants would be claiming that they have somehow that they deserve protection of the Hatch Act because there has been some coercion against them to do certain things. Is that what they're saying?
I'm sorry, what was, I didn't hear the last sentence.
I said, I would imagine that the defendants who are saying that they are protected by the Hatch Act, is that what they're saying, Vanita? That they are alleging that they have been the victims of some coercion in the federal system?
My understanding of what Attorney Lee was saying was that in response to Mark Meadows' motion to remove the case to federal court, that a defense to that action is that he wasn't acting under, quote, oath of office because he was violating the Hatch Act, which was intimidating others, including the poll workers
Mhm.
in connection with the reason that we have this indictment, Attorney Lee?
Yes. Well, I suspect that even the most conservative judge is going to reject these contention for removal from the state court to federal court. And I understand what they're attempting to do. They're trying to get a better venue of jury pool. They're trying to get the case out of Fulton County, Georgia, which overwhelmingly is Democratic, but you committed a crime in Fulton County, Georgia. And so unfortunately, they may have what's considered a bad venue, but when you roll the dice and engage in these activities in that county, then you get subjected to the court's jurisdiction because you committed what is allegedly as a crime. Now, we as commentators, we recognize that every individual is entitled to their day in court. And with that, the axiom is that you presume innocent until proven guilty. So let's start with the proposition that all these 19 defendants are innocent until they're proven guilty. But having said that, the allegations, what I told last week, they did something unusual. Each of the material allegations, they got the defendants on recording or email or otherwise. So it's pretty damning type evidence against these defendants in this Georgia case. And a lot of the commentators, Milton, Vanita, they were saying that with this type of indictment, you're going to get some of the defendants that might flip, and become witnesses against other parties. Well, we saw some of that jockeying early on because the one lawyer, Sidney Powell, it looked like she may be the person that everybody want to flip on. I don't know.
Well,
Why does she look like that? I mean, because it's a female lawyer? I'm trying to be facetious, but why do you say she looks like?
Because she was the one that would talk about these crazy theory like Kraken and Venezuela. It got so bizarre until I couldn't even follow what she was talking about when they did the infamous press conference with her and Rudy Giuliani, and when his hair, the dye started running down his face.
Mhm.
Well, it was her that said that Kraken, that Chavez something. I was trying to follow it, didn't make any sense to me. But somehow, the then President of the United States listened to this person with these esoteric theories that just didn't make any sense at all. And so they were saying that she was behind the movement with all these idiotic theories as to why, it was just bizarre. I don't remember all the allegations, but they got more and more bizarre as the matter progressed. And of course, all the cases that she filed, she lost.
there's speculation that Mark Meadows may cooperate in the case against the former president brought by Jack Smith. There's been speculation there. We'll see with respect to this indictment in Georgia. There's also, again, it's possible that some of the low-level players, if you will, if there's such a thing, Travion Cuddy from Chicago, for example, the former Kanye West publicist, and Pastor Stephen Lee, why they would ever get involved, in this kind of matter, one only knows. One can only speculate. But Pastor Lee's attorney stated that he's never met the former president. He has never been associated with the former president. So interesting that he's been indicted as well. I believe, Lutheran pastor here in Illinois.
Well, of all the things that I thought was bad about the election, Vanita and Milton, one of the most egregious act of misconduct dealt with the attempted extortion of the two Georgia election workers. They falsely said to them their life was in danger, and they tried to get the women to commit perjury, and they used threats of their life. These are ordinary citizens, and they had the weight of all these powerful people telling them that you're going to be killed or injured unless you cooperate with us. We provide you a safe harbor. The whole thing was ludicrous. And they were dumb enough to be recorded saying all these things at the police station. The police department recorded the entire conversation. And that's what's so devastating about these cases. What Nathaniel Willis charged them with is what's on the recording. And so everything that she put in indictment comes verbatim from the defendant's own mouth. But I thought one of the most egregious things, because you have a direct threat of violence on these women's lives based on stuff that these two people, Cuddy and, well, later worked for Kanye West, now name is Ye, perpetrated. And it was just terrible. You know, you made these people a scapegoat, claiming that they somehow were rigging the election. It was such a false issue. And now, by the way, Attorney Banks, I noticed that in that lawsuit against Rudy Giuliani, the defamation lawsuit, he's basically admitted what they said was lying. So it's going to be fascinating to see how these unfold over the course of the year. I suspect that somebody's going to be probably found guilty in those cases. I'm not sure how many will defend it, but it looked like some strong evidence to me if it withstand the jurisdictional challenges. Okay, we'll take a call. Pierre Pullen, do you have a question or comment for us today, sir?
Yes, Nate. You hear me good?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Here's a question for Milton, and I know Vanita will remember this. You don't hear too much of anybody talking about state and federal public defender service. You know, because I'm thinking, you know, you got the one black brother, he's sitting in jail, facing other charges along with this. Meadows and them, they want to get things removed to federal court. You know, they better be careful about what they wish for, because I know Vanita will recall when they went after Rod Blagojevich, he beat the first case, and the feds get to, on a hung jury, the feds get to come right back at him and go for another jury. And they convicted him on the second time. So I don't know. But I just wanted somebody to comment on, you know, public defenders, state and federal, and, you know, the government being able to come at you again if you get a hung jury.
Well, the government can try you more than once. I've seen some cases be tried 4 times before the Orange County District Attorney got a conviction of a doctor in an abortion case some years ago. So until you're found not guilty, even if you get a 11-to-1 hung jury for guilt, they can prosecute you again, try you again, and try to convict you again. So, you know, I mean, when you get into 4 and 5 times and they don't get a conviction, you might have a fruitful motion for dismissal as an abuse of the process, but there's no written limitation on the number of times you can be tried. There's no, if the facts fit for federal and the facts fit for state prosecution, as you saw in the, I don't want to use the King case because it was my case, but the cops who was prosecuted in the state court were found not guilty. They were prosecuted for the same acts in the federal court, and 2 out of the 4 were found guilty. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's the law.
I had The other aspect about that is that he was talking about the competency of the federal defender. I'm not sure whether he had an opinion, but what's your take on whether or not they're offer good representation, average or bad? What's your thought process?
You got some very good public defenders, state public defenders, and you got some very good federal public defenders, Nathaniel. Just like in the private sector, you got some dudes who'll take a lot of money from you. And I mean, I know the reputation of some here in LA, and their specialty is making a deal, pleading you, not fighting a case. I've seen that in several high-profile serious cases out here. So you're not automatically given the best defense because you have a private attorney. It just depends on where you are, who you are, and what the situation is, in my experience.
How do we balance the Fifth Amendment right to not be subject to where no person should be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of their life and limb? I know there's exceptions to that. Attorney Grimes just mentioned the multi-state exception, for example, where you can be tried for a crime in multiple jurisdictions across state lines, and then you got civil versus criminal. But we saw an acquittal in the R. Kelly case actually be retried several times recently as well.
Was he retried for the same offense?
Well, see, that's the question. Is it the quote, what is the quote, same offense? That is the question, Attorney Grimes.
That's the requirement of the government to show that there were some other witnesses, other victims rather, but not for the same identical offense if he was found not guilty. Theoretically, you can't do that, Vanita.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Okay, let's have a live commentary. Attorney Kenneth Lester, well-known Atlanta, Georgia attorney. How you doing today, Attorney Lester?
I'm well. How about yourself?
Great. Real quickly, we're talking about those indictments. Your city now is the legal universe right now of legal occurrences. You got the former president, 19 people. What's going on there on the ground there in Atlanta? What's the latest?
Well, right now, everybody's kind of just sitting back waiting to see how things develop. As you know, in the legal community, a lot is in the hands of the judges and the decisions they make early on and setting the tone as you go forward and what you're able to present in trial and what you'll be able to present before the jury. So, as you know, there's a hearing scheduled for Monday with one of the defendants trying to get it removed to federal court. So we're going to see kind of what happens, and we're just sitting back waiting to see how the judges rule and things develop.
Well, what about I saw on TV, there were people that waited for 10 hours. Was there a big crowd there supporting Trump as he got processed through the jail system?
Well, I don't think it's as much as may have shown. I don't think as much attention as what may have been presented. As the news often does, they just show what they see, not necessarily a big zoom out picture, but they narrow in and amplify what's there. I think a lot of people, like I said, are just waiting with eager anticipation and just patiently waiting to see how the judges rule and what's presented as it goes forward.
Well, what about the feeling of the people that live there in Atlanta? I mean, you've had more elections in Georgia than any place on the planet, it seems like. I mean, you had all those, you have these elections where you have another election, and I mean, it just drives me crazy because you have runoff, you have to get 50%, but you've had all these elections there in Georgia, and I can't keep track of them. And then you have Republicans win the state house, the Democrat win the Senate, and somehow this idiot think he got cheated when the Republican ended up winning the majority of their offices, it seems like.
Right. Yeah. Each election, it seems like some things change slowly, like the wheels of justice sometimes seemingly move slowly. But it's as the metropolitan area grows, the dynamics in the voting demographic also starts to swing. The pendulum starts to swing slowly in turns. I guess it's anticipated that metropolitan area is supposed to grow from 5 million to 7 million over the next 5 to 7 years. And right now we're probably a little bit over 5. And as that number grows, not just downtown Atlanta, there's more people coming into the city and the area from all over, and it tends to swing more purplish, let's just say it that way, as opposed to red or just blue. So it's like dynamite ready to kind of just slowly ignite.
So you're having this massive population shift there in Georgia. Is there a lot of job opportunity there? What's causing you to have this growth in population? What's the attraction?
I think there are job opportunities here. I think one of the reasons why the last time when the governor that ran in Kemp ran the second time, it wasn't close. And one of the reasons was during, or so it seems, is during COVID, he kept a lot of things open and the economy continued to grow. And a lot of people, as you know, vote with their pocket.
Well, I thought it would be a lot closer because I thought Stacey Abrams would elevate a lot of the voter turnout there. But it was surprising to me that on the same ballot, the Democrat would win the Senate races, but lose the state house races. And that I didn't understand. One of the things, though, is that the Senate races, they had like $100 million. And I don't think that the down ballot races raised that type of money. Did money have any factor in that also?
I'm not sure about the advertising dollars. I just know that, like I said, one of the reasons I said purplish is because for that very reason that on part of the ballot, it went red and the other part, it went blue with the same people coming out to vote. So that kind of tells you something. It's more thinking than just people that's voting party lines. I'll say it that way.
Okay.
More thinking involved and more thinking about what's actually impacting and what affects the voter that's voting, as opposed to just blindly just picking a side and just voting. That always happens, but I think it's more of the let's think about what's going on here and how does it impact me the most.
One final question. On the news, from my standpoint, I was seeing that they were saying that some people waited up to 10 hours for this Trump motorcade. And in one station, seemed like there was thousands of people out there waiting on this motorcade to come by. Was that accurate, or what was the actual turnout for that? I was just curious.
I wasn't on the ground there, so I can't tell you with any veracity of the actual turnout. I do know that kind of like there's a contingency of people that will blindly follow and blindly support, their chosen candidate. For instance, I guess you have in the North Georgia area, the Major Taylor Greene. She gets a lot of support in her area. And as you see, she's making a lot of noise on the national stage, but not so much noise here in Georgia locally. Sometimes what looks like nationally is not actually what's going on locally, even though they may be from that local area.
Nate,
as far as
okay, go ahead,
support.
Milton.
Nate, I believe that Trump does possess a charismatic personality for a lot of people. I know one politician in particular out here in Los Angeles County, a mayor of a city, who admits, I am mesmerized by that man. He can do no wrong. And this is a gentleman who's been in office for 20 years in his city. And he said, I'm mesmerized by him. So a lot of people, when you have these charismatic leaders like Hitler and Rare, they come along, the people react differently to them than they do the regular individual. And I think that's what we see in Trump. Like this man said, I can shoot him on Main Street or shoot him at the town square in New York. I'm not going to be found guilty for it. So again, he's continued to mesmerize and have a faithful following of people. We've seen it. That's throughout history. Some people have that quality.
Attorney Banks, this is directly to you. What carried Biden to victory was the extraordinary turnout, among other things, of African-American female voters. What you think, if anything, motivated that group of voters to be so much involved in the political process?
African-American female voters have always and historically been involved in the political process. Dating back even before the March on Washington on August 28, 1963. At that march, several women were involved in the planning and orchestration of that march and civil rights efforts throughout the years. But at that march, there were not any women speakers. But as the march and rally is taking place today, you will definitely see a lot of Black women speakers that have been involved in the planning and execution of this march, that have been involved in the voting rights and election protection initiatives on a national scale, have been very actively engaged, as Attorney Lester well knows, in Georgia and nationally across our nation in mobilizing the vote and getting the vote to turn out. African-American women are now increasingly running for office. There are at least 3 women that are running for the United States Senate, where there's no African-American female representation. And there's only been 2 African-American women United States senators, Miss Carol Mosley Braun, as well as our current Vice President Kamala Harris. And our mobilization led to and contributed significantly to the election of our first African-American female Vice President Kamala Harris. So we've been very actively engaged, to answer your question, Attorney Lee, and will continue to be engaged. And you'll see our presence all over the, not a commemoration of the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, but a continuation of that march. You'll see the influence of African-American women today.
Attorney, you're the former president of the nation's oldest Black Bar Association, National Bar Association. What, in that capacity, what do you think that the National Bar could do to kind of change the trajectory of these adverse laws we're receiving from the current Supreme Court?
Absolutely. The National Bar Association, founded in 1925 by 10 founders and 1 sole female founder, when the American Bar Association refused to admit us to their organization. Today, what we should be doing is advocating against and advocating against the turn back of affirmative action, of civil rights that we're seeing. We should be advocating against voter suppression, as we are doing, drafting legislation. We should be crafting innovative arguments like our social engineers in Brown versus Board of Education, Thurgood Marshall. For example, we should be standing up as this nation's legal conscience in collaboration with the Congressional Black Caucus, which is our nation's legislative caucus, to advocate for legislation that inures to the benefit of every citizen in the United States.
Well, one final question on the vote issue for everyone. Our audience, we got a really sharp audience that watch our show. We're over 100,000 listeners now, but they want to know about this Harris County, Texas, which is Houston. In essence, the Texas legislature, Republican control, abolished the Harris County election administrator, which means that the most populated city in Texas, one of the most populated city in America, don't have a person in charge of their election as the rest of the counties in Texas have, which is kind of ill-conceived. But the people, the Democrats in Texas, feel that this is an attempt to suppress the voter turnout, to cause chaos in that county. And the ultimate result is to quote from some of the political pundits, to steal the next election. I've not watched that legislation very carefully or anything like that, but I saw part of the coverage on the news, but I've not read the actual legislation. But having said that, we're seeing not just the abolishment of certain fundamental rights, and such as affirmative action. I think the thing that's had the biggest impact is not just this voter idea, but the rollback of civil rights, like the elimination of affirmative action that we're seeing on wild scale basis now. And it's devastating effect. And almost everybody forget about the fact that's why we had affirmative action in the first place. Now, what does that have to do with vote? It has a lot to do with voting, because when you go to vote in the next election, it's going to be the most important one, because these issues are so important to our well-being and our success.
And Attorney Lee,
But-
as you know, and again, it's important for African-American lawyers and the National Bar Association to stand up and speak out and actually bring legislation, file lawsuits to reverse these anti-democratic actions that we're seeing, across our nation today.
One final comment, Milton, in California, your great state's on the news every day. And I saw today that they're doing a big push in your state to enlist Asian voters. Do they have the same type of input in the African American community out there?
I don't see it, Nate, not a push like you're saying that there is for Asian voters, but I think African Americans out here are pretty conscientious of their duty to vote. That's my interpretation. Vanita may have a more insightful view of it since she studied these things more than I do.
Well, I think overall voter turnout can be greater, and I defer to you, Attorney Grimes, on the voter turnout in your jurisdiction. But I do think that among African Americans nationally, that we need to turn out in greater numbers. That to sit on, the bench and say that nothing's going to change and I'm not being impacted, favorably, we just can't take that position. And so as leaders, we have to engage, educate, inform African-American communities and communities of color that they have an obligation to vote, and that it's a fundamental right. I think it's the most important thing that a citizen can do and of course, serving on a jury is the second most important obligation that a citizen has. So rather than continue to say that this is the next election is going to be the most important of our lifetimes, we have to show people, you know, why that is the case. And that's why I applaud you, Attorney Lee, for periodically just laying out the list of accomplishments of this current administration, and you compare those to those of the former administration, and we just have to keep drilling that message home.
And I think that it's next weekend, the Labor Day weekend.
It is.
So
Next
because
Monday.
Labor Day will be off the air until the following weekend. We did let our listeners know that because we don't typically broadcast during the holiday weekend. But I'd like to thank all our callers, our special guest, Attorney Ken Lester out of Atlanta today, and also our superstar panelists, Attorney Banks and Grimes, and all of you that call in. We thank you for your participation. I apologize for not reaching all the listeners that are still in the waiting room, but our time is run now. So we look forward to talking to everybody in 2 weeks. So stay tuned for us. We look forward to discussing the important legal issues of the day. Thank you, everyone, and have a blessed weekend. Take care.
Goodbye, guys.
Thank you. Have a great day.